as much as him.
Here's Johnny.
They're here.
Welcome to my world, bitch.
Hello, Horror Nights in family, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, your home for scary movie reviews every single week. You look so nice today. I'm really into seeing all my horror fan friends here with me on this fine day. It must be Wednesday. Well, actually, it's Friday. But that's okay, because either way, that means we're gonna be talking about a horror movie. So, let's do it. The film Choose or Die follows a young girl who, after firing up a lost 80s survival horror game, unleashes a hidden curse that tears reality apart, forcing her to make some terrifying decisions and face deadly consequences. It was released this year and started streaming on Netflix, and it was directed by Toby Meekins and also written by Toby Meekins, along with Simon Allen and Michael James Wilkinson. It stars Iola Evans, Asa Butterfield, and the Hollywood nightmare, Robert Englund. Well, just his voice, but I will tell you guys that I knew little to nothing about this film when I decided to watch it after seeing it on the trending page on Netflix. So when I heard Robert Englund's voice playing, I got excited for the film. So in this video, I'm going to be doing an in-depth review of the film, then my overall opinion, the characters, and of course my favorite kills. And there are timestamps below if you want to skip around a little bit. And of course, warning, this video contains lots and lots of spoilers for the film Choose or Die, so proceed with caution. Okay, let's get started. The film begins and we are introduced to a lovely family of three who are screaming and shouting at one another, getting ready for dinner. We then meet the father, a man who is apparently living in the 80s according to his son, and we see his computer is booting up a game called Cursor. The game is introducing him to level 1, where he must prove himself worthy of the prize. It asks him if he wants to proceed or ignore the request, and of course, he chooses to proceed. It's actually a cool beginning because we sort of see how this game works. It's as if it can see you. We see that the game magically gets him another beer, but it says behind you on the label, and then it says fooled you. It then asks if he wants the lights on or off, and then we get this remix of his son and wife fighting on the stereo. But then it asks his tongue, her ears, and it makes him choose or die. Then we get this weird high screeching noise. He then makes his way out after choosing, and we can see that he picked his tongue, and that level 1 is complete, and we get our opening credits. And we see the events play out as the man continues to play the game. Then he gets a question to make copies, which we can see that he does. Then we meet our main character, Kayla, and she lives in a lower income city, and she is employed for what looks like a level entry cleaning person. We then meet her best friend, Isaac, who seems to be into coding and all things tech and computer, and he is also creating his own video game. And we can also see that he has a crush on his friend, Kayla. We also learn that Kayla dropped out from what I assume college, where she was also going for coding. Kayla then spots a pile of junk that Isaac bought, and she looks through it and finds the game Cursor that has a $125,000 grand prize if you win. Isaac then informs her that there are a ton of unclaimed prizes from retro games. Let me know in the comments below if this is actually something that's true. I'm curious. Then we get a very cool voice cameo from Robert Englund. It's funny because Isaac didn't say Freddy Krueger, but did an impression of him. She then invites Isaac to a diner later that night because she's gonna help him clean up an old device that he bought. Kayla arrives home and we meet her mother, who is holding this stuffed animal with a voice recording on it. At this point, we can sense that the stuffed animal is connected to someone they both lost, and we quickly learn that it was her younger brother, and her mother is coping with his death with drugs. Now, we don't know how he died yet, though. We also see that her mother is seeing and hearing rats in the walls. So essentially, okay, we have Kayla, a young woman who has seemed to have struggled a great deal most of her life, but has a knack for coding. She is now back at work, and it's an odd job of cleaning floors and windows in an empty building. It seems that the building is owned by some company called Kismet. It is now later, and Kayla's at the diner waiting for Isaac, and while she waits, she boots up the game Cursor. The waitress then comes up to her and asks if she wants to order anything, but she asks for a minute to decide. The game boots up, and we see the same opening, but now it's asking if she wants coffee or cake. Kayla types in coffee, and the waitress appears there with coffee. Then we see the game is once again controlling the environment around her. She tries to close the game, and we see her brother telling her she has to choose or die. She opens up her computer again, and the game is asking if they should take a break, to which Kayla takes a break. Then we see the waitress is strangely dropping glasses on the floor. The game asks if she should break more or clean up, to which Kayla writes clean up. And then we see the waitress get on her hands and knees and starts eating the broken glass. This scene was so cool because we're continuing to see how the game controls literally everything. The boss at this point is even like jumping up and like glitching. She then wakes up and is back in her bedroom, and we can assume that it is the next day. And we watch as she pulls out the insides of the game to essentially destroy it. We then see that a police officer is there to speak to Kayla about what we can assume is about the incident from last night. Then we learn from the conversation between her mother and the police officer that her little brother died from accidental drowning. We then meet Lance, who is the one who is supplying her mother with drugs. I think this guy is like a landlord or like a supporter of the landlord, kind of like an admin guy. We also learn that he likes to go through people's mailboxes, and he starts reading a rejection letter addressed to Kayla about a job that she didn't get. Kayla then goes to confide in Isaac, but he doesn't really believe her, but he does tell her he's going to do research on the game. She is now back at work cleaning the floors and gets a call from her mother about the rats in the walls. She then hears rats squeaking through the phone, and this scene was pretty cool. A random computer turns on and it tells her she is now on level 2. And it looks like one of those old game mazes, but it's her apartment layout with a rat in the kitchen and her mother in her bedroom. Considering this is a low-budget film, this was actually a really cool adaptation for this particular scene. Essentially, level 2, Kayla is the rat and she must find her mother. Kayla then tells her mother to go to the window and jump because the rat is now chewing through her bedroom door. Her mother then jumps and she picks up the computer and smashes it and then gets fired, but we see that she has made it past level 2. She is now in the hospital with her mother, who is in bad shape, but she's alive. Kayla then goes back home and her apartment is a mess because of course from the game. This scene was pretty neat because as she is making her way through the apartment, the audio from the game is the background music. We also see that the commands she typed into the game are also scrawled onto the walls. Lance then somehow just like appears and is just being really nasty and gross and very seedy. Kayla is now pounding on Isaac's door, insisting that he believe her, and he finally does after he sees the pictures on her phone from her apartment. We also learn that Isaac did some digging and came up with essentially nothing. Kayla even looked through the coding of the game itself and still couldn't find anything. Then we learn that sometimes old games have hidden code in their sound, so they're going to try to separate out the sound from the game. Interesting. I never knew that. While they wait for the game to trigger itself at 2 a.m., Isaac explains to Kayla that for his video game that he is designing, he wants to make the players pay a penalty if they decide to cheat, essentially to make the player hurt. Then the game triggers itself on and they extract the noise, but apparently it's not normal coding because there needs to be a cursor. Level 3 then begins and once again it's predicting the words that Isaac is saying. Also in normal coding it's just a bunch of numbers, but in this game the coding is these weird symbols. The game then tells the two to look and they are greeted with a red door and a blue door, and of course they have to choose which one they want to go through. So in order to pick, Isaac listens and we hear a whisper of die behind the blue door, so they choose the red door. And as they make their way through the door, they are greeted with a pool where her brother drowned. So this is where the movie kind of went south for me, but let's keep going. Kayla is now following her dead ghost brother into the pool that is filled with fog. Isaac then follows her into the pool and they lose track of each other very quickly. We hear the ghostly whispers of her dead brother and spot the stuffed animal that is now being manipulated by the game. Then we see the ghost brother attacking Isaac, and of course Kayla has to choose who to save, her best friend, who is probably still alive, or her already dead brother. Then we get this weird scene of Kayla choking her brother to death because she wants to save Isaac. Isaac then wakes up and they're back in his apartment, and the computer tells Kayla that she has made it to level 3. And we get the background of the drowning incident, and Kayla apparently looked away for 1 second, and then her brother was dead. And she comes to the realization that the game wants their players to suffer. It's odd because, as I mentioned, Kayla is already suffering in her real life, so I'm not sure why the filmmakers want to make her life harder. Isaac then explains zines to Kayla. Essentially, they are an 80s cult thing where kids used to play games with a dial-up, and they would spend $1 for the first minute and 45 cents for every minute after, and kids would play this game for hours until their parents got a huge phone bill. So kids had to get creative and would break into the phone lines and play their games for hours for free. So using this method of hacking the phone lines, Isaac was able to pinpoint an address of where the headquarters of the game actually is. They then arrive at their destination, and it's an old abandoned warehouse. They then trespass and break in, and inside they hear a phone ringing and find one desk and one chair, and a very old phone line system. Isaac then spots power cables, and they follow them to a back room filled with old tech and a board with the same symbols we saw earlier. Kayla figures out that they made the game at this location. Isaac then turns on an old TV, and a tape pops out with the label Cursor Beta 1. They play it, and they see a man who we can assume is the creator and his test subject. These symbols we are seeing affect reality, and each of them means something like fire, water, and blood. Apparently, it's some curse that this game developer discovered and inhabited the curse into the game, and the more the curse suffer, aka the player, the more the cursor benefits. The player then has to choose to eat the computer or eat his arm. Well, we all know what happens next, but before that, the developer slices his arm and we see blood pouring out, but then the player chose arm and bites his own arm, and the stab wound reverses, and the developer is fine while the player is suffering. But before they can hightail it out of there, it's time for Kayla's next level, but it's too early. But the game knows that they cheated, so it'll cost them, which ties back into Isaac's theory for his game. Isaac tries to unplug it, but it doesn't work. He then goes through this portal-like thing, and the developers ask Kayla if she wants to rewind or fast forward. She chooses to fast forward, and we see the insides of a VHS tape come out of Isaac's mouth, and then she picks rewind, and the tape goes back in. Now, I gotta be honest, I didn't really understand her logic. Like, was there even any logic here? Once all of the tape is out of his mouth, she has completed level 4, and she rushes over to Isaac, and with his last breath, they have a moment, and then he dies. Spoiler alert, I don't like that they took her only true friend in her life and killed him. Not cool. But then she sees that she is on the last level and has to beat the boss. She's now venturing to some coordinates she was given, but before she can do anything, she gets a call from her mother, but it's actually the landlord Lance, and apparently the hospital is letting him take her home once the mother is better. Kayla ventures into the woods and comes upon a modern house and hears music playing. She goes inside and sees the family we know from the beginning of the film, and they're looking a little bit different. The mother and son have these magazine cutouts on their faces to hide what we can assume are scars. The father, aka the one who made the copies in the beginning of the film, asks her who she is, and she responds, "A player," and he invites her to sit down. She does, and he asks her how she found them, and she told him the game brought her here. Then we get some backstory of how he came to have the game, and he tells Kayla he found it at some clearance sale, and he woke it up. It also seems that this man is kind of on his high horse and is now an abuser of his family. Then he says that the game is looking for someone exactly like Kayla. Her phone then goes off, and she tells him that he is the final level, the boss battle, to which he is shocked that he is even a boss. The game asks her, him or you, and the two battle it out. But it looks like the roles are reversed. When they hurt themselves, it actually hurts the other person. So this entire scene is just a series of them hurting themselves with knives, guns, plates, etc. The wife then grabs the gun and starts shooting at Kayla because she's had enough of her husband. But he overtakes her and he puts the gun to his head. But there are no more bullets left. Kayla then starts lugging this weird lawn ornament to the pool in order to drown herself. He then slices his throat as Kayla is essentially drowning in the pool. We then see water start gushing out of the boss and he falls to the ground and is dead. Then we see the computer say this. The scene ends and we see the wife telling Kayla to tell no one that she was there. She then gets an alert on her phone that she has won. Then I thought the film was over, but it's more of a voiceover, and Kayla's now at Isaac's, seeming to have worked the game out and is now targeting Lance, the landlord. She is essentially leading him on for some services, but using the curse of the game to, of course, kill him. Kayla is now controlling him to put his face in a sink full of used needles. So we see that the cuts she has had from the boss level are now gone because she proved herself worthy and is now in control. She is essentially using the game against evil people for her own benefit. Then we get this nasty scene. Then we see her get a call from the game developer who we saw earlier in the film, and his name is Beck. And he asks her who will suffer next, and she said, only people who deserve it. And the film ends. Alright guys, opinion time. So did I like the film? Meh. I believe that it started out so strong. I loved the beginning, the introduction to the game, the diner scene with Kayla and the waitress. I was excited to see where the film would go, but then it kind of fell apart and got a little confusing. The film really reminded me of a Black Mirror episode that was rejected. I wasn't really into the idea of Kayla's little brother making like these continuous appearances throughout like the different levels of the game. And it was a little odd to see her fake kill him so that she could save Isaac for him to just die in the next level. And that whole boss section was also very confusing. Why was the guy from the beginning the boss? Was it because he made copies? Why did his son Gabe retreat to this strange behavior of taping magazine cutouts to his face and to his mother's face? I'm sure the writers wanted it to seem like this is how he was dealing with trauma. And like, why did the father become such an asshole? I mean, we could tell that his family treated him poorly in the beginning, but it's really no excuse to become this like dictator abuser. Like, just leave the family. I guess we can also look at it as his family was sort of dominating him probably most of his life, and now he wants his revenge and is dominating them. It also came across that the writers and director took all these different ideas in like the horror genre and just threw them all together. A cursed video game reminds me of Stay Alive. Making copies reminds me of The Ring. And the whole like messing with reality reminds me of like The Matrix. I mean, hello, Red or Blue Door. The film also reminded me of like Brain Scan, Dreamscape, and of course A Nightmare on Elm Street. I think they were trying to make a smart horror film, but they missed a lot of targets. I wish we had learned more about the origin of the game itself, like the rules and the guy who created it. They tried to explain it, but it still didn't really make a lot of sense. Like, where did the curse come from? Is Kayla now the boss for the boss level? Or is she like the partner of Cursor with Beck? And what happened to Kayla? Did she get the prize money? Is she now just like going out and finding bad people and making them play the game to benefit herself and also benefit Beck? Like, how does she know who is inherently bad and deserves to be punished versus someone who might have just made a bad decision? This film just really needed Wes Craven at the helm for it to be a success, in my opinion. Craven was a visual master who brought many of his scenes from here to here and here to here, you know? Like, he made it seem plausible and better understood. I will say, though, that I did love the music. It was very, like, techno-heavy and very 80s horror. Okay, let's talk about the characters. Small cast, nobody really stood out for me. I think the filmmakers wanted us to be sympathetic towards Kayla, but it was sort of like, here, give her a dead little brother, a mother dealing with depression and drugs, also throw in that she's poor and she has no future, which they probably assumed would pull at the heartstrings, but for me, it didn't. Not to sound like it needed like some rich girl from a good family to be good, but for me, her base storyline took a lot of focus away from the actual story. I was very distracted by wondering about her life versus like how she was gonna beat the game. But I do see how the game needed somebody like Kayla, who was suffering and needed a helping hand and did meet a lot of good people versus bad people. It was just kind of an odd way to go about it. I did like Isaac, but we didn't really learn much about him. It was sort of like there he was existing in this odd apartment of old video games and computers, and he also had a crush on Kayla. He was also like teaching her how to code. I wish we had more of a backstory on how they became friends. I think they might have like went to college or school together, but it wasn't super clear. Then we have Kayla's mother, who was there essentially to inflict pain and trauma on. There was also the really gross landlord Lance, who was just a pawn for the end of the film. Then we also have like that family in the beginning, but they didn't really do anything for me either. Then there is Beck, who is supposedly the game developer. The game is essentially cursed, and Beck seems to benefit from all of the healing powers while the player is suffering. And he says the more the cursed suffers, the more the cursor benefits. But I'm still kind of confused as to like why he would want to make this into a video game. Should we just write him off as some like lunatic who decided to just curse other people for his own gain? And from the small scenes that we got from him, we have to assume that he hasn't aged since 1984. Is this one of the powers that he got from the game? But that was like never explained, how he was still sort of human, but not. And it's funny considering the game was found in off-brand sales and shops. Did that many people die to where Kayla was the only one that made it to the boss level? We also know that he is somehow connected to this Kismet company, which is the building that Kayla was cleaning when she worked for the cleaning company. Then we see it again in the warehouse. But that was never explained. Okay, let's talk about kills. The first one we got was the waitress in the beginning, which was pretty epic if you ask me. This is what I was hoping for the rest of the film, but unfortunately, we didn't really get that. I liked how the game was able to control everything. Like, we got the weird glitch in the beginning with the boss, like that was really cool. Then we have Isaac with that like weird videotape death. I assume that this was his punishment because they cheated. So if Kayla fast forward or rewound it, it wouldn't have mattered because he was being punished because they cheated and he would have died anyways. Then we have Lance, who died from the needles being punctured through his face. Okay, so I was confused here, like why are there so many needles in the sink? Did the game put them there? Was he like trying to clean them or something? So my favorite, and honestly, correct me if I'm wrong, my favorite kill, because I don't even know if we got full clarification if she actually died, but I did like the waitress scene the most. In conclusion, I don't want you guys to take away that I hated this film and had too many questions for it to be understood, because I think overall it was good. I like to openly ask questions because I also want to hear what you guys have to say, like what you think the answers are. I've always loved the idea of a film taking a horror game and having it mess with reality. I do think some plot lines and characters definitely needed to be ironed out, but as always, I do encourage you guys to check this film out or give me your opinion, because your opinion could be so much different than mine. And that's good. All right, friends, that's gonna be it for me end of this video. And if you like these kinds of videos, I have an entire playlist dedicated to horror movie reviews in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. And you can follow me on all my social medias if you want to. And I'll see you guys soon.